All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to the Anime NebrasKon Twitch stream. My name is Andy Huggins, and I am a film studies graduate from the University of Nebraska. Never get tired of saying that. But one of the things that is super important for me is, of course, anime. And I am really fascinated with the way that anime can cross over from the east to the west, and in interesting ways that it's influenced our culture as well as our culture has influenced anime. And so for this panel, we're going to go ahead and discuss that, the influence of anime in the West, particularly in Hollywood. Now, I want to apologize to you guys. Earlier in my first panel, couldn't figure out how to completely cast this presentation directly into stream, so we're just looking off the program. Shouldn't make much of a difference. Only thing you're missing out is some really nice transitions. But hey, you can come back next year and probably see it live. How about that? Anyways, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? So, what are we going to do during this panel? Well, first off, we're going to explore the inspirations Hollywood had taken from anime in the beginning, um, look at all of the different Hollywood adaptations that we can, talk about the future adaptations of anime, and then at the end we should have ample time for an audience discussion. So go ahead and leave any comments in in the chat. Love to hear what you think, especially if you've seen one of these movies. Just ping, just say, hey, I saw this movie. Maybe give us an idea of what you thought about it. We'll compare and contrast. We'll take notes. And trust me, the test at the end of the panel, it's super easy. You guys are going to ace it. Just kidding. No test. No issues. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start us off. So for the purposes of this panel, let's go ahead and describe what the heck is Hollywood? What does that mean? So the term Hollywood evokes images of big budget films and celebrity culture, but not every film that we're discussing always goes under that nebulous term. In this panel, we're going to designate Hollywood as films intended to reach a Western English-speaking audience, even if it's not explicitly created in Hollywood, California, where all the biggest studios, host their features. For this purpose, we will not consider filmed adaptations that are unlicensed adaptations made without the rights, such as this Dragon Ball film. I am not even going to attempt to read off the title of that, but it's a Korean adaptation of Dragon Ball in the 80s, so I've never really knew much about it. If you guys have seen this, let me know. We're not going to cover films that were released in Japan or elsewhere unless it's intended for a Western or international market. For instance, the upper right-hand image, Bleach, we're not going to cover that because that's, of course, a Japanese film adaptation. We're not going to cover adaptations that are not directly from an anime, a manga, a light novel, or a tangential series of media. So that means we're not going to cover the 1998 Godzilla remake. And just to save on time, we're only going to be talking about the first film if it's a series or if there were sequels, such as Guyver, Dark Hero, which is going to be the sequel to the first film we're going to talk about. Anyways, moving on. The history of Hollywood and anime. So in the 1960s, Western film studios had begun to notice the cheap and effective methods of animation produced in Japan from the likes of Tezuka Productions, who of course Astro Boy, Kimba the White Lion, tons of features that even if you don't know too much of, were very important for the creation of anime as we know it. As well as Tatsunoko Productions, who created Speed Racer, Gatchaman, all sorts of others. And from the late 60s to the 80s, television studios in the US would license and localize anime for their domestic markets geared to younger audiences. For instance, I grew up with anime as we know it now, but, my father, he grew up with Speed Racer. To him, that was one of his first exposures to popular culture from Japan, even if he wasn't aware of it. Of course, in 1998, Akira was first released in the United States to an incredible success, formally introducing the Western world to the genre that would become known internationally as anime. And the advent of the VHS, tapes allowed Akira to be spread past its niche market, extending from science fiction and animation buffs to the public at large and catching the attention of many working in the film. Because Akira could be that movie that you're just watching one day and you decide to record it and pass it off to your friend and say, hey man, you got to check out this animated movie. Like, it's not like what Disney's doing. There's blood and guts and motorcycles and cool stuff. So from that word of mouth, Akira became really, really popular. Now, capitalizing on the incredible success of Akira here in the West and in the United States, the distributor Manga Entertainment began releasing more titles in this genre of anime, including titles such as Fist of the North Star, Battle Angel Alita, and Ghost in the Shell. We're going to come back to those a little bit later in our presentation. So throughout the 1990s, a lot more directors became familiar and wanted to adapt anime, including Mobile Suit Gundam, which you'll see concept art at the top right. That was done by famous science fiction futurist Sid Mead, rest in peace. My the Psychic Girl, which is a big project that Tim Burton wanted to do in the 90s. Akira, multiple attempts to do an adaptation of Akira. You can see concept art for the latest attempt there in the middle. Astro Boy, of course, one of the most seminal anime in history, as well as Neon Genesis Evangelion, which you can see concept art from Weta Workshop, the production company behind Lord of the Rings, when they tried to adapt Evangelion in the early 90s, and plenty more, Now, as anime had begun to prove its influence on pop culture, a lot of directors want to use the iconography or the themes of popular anime. The most well-known example is the Matrix trilogy, which was originally pitched to producers using footage from Ghost in the Shell, the original animated movie, and they said, hey, we want to make a movie that looks like this and feels like this. Director Darren Aronofsky had originally intended to remake Satoshi Kon's film Perfect Blue, which is an incredible movie. But he actually bought the rights and used his rights to kind of pick and choose certain themes and elements from that movie for Black Swan, as well as other moments in this film that are inspired from other Satoshi Kon works. And other filmmakers have taken a broader attempt at adapting a whole genre of anime. And of course, I think the one that most people would recognize is Pacific Rim, which is of course a great big love letter to mecha anime, from all the way from Gundam to Neon Genesis Evangelion. It really stands out. So we're going to go ahead and start talking about the actual individual movies. Now, what are we looking for in an adaptation? 3 points. Now, does the adaptation stay faithful to the story or themes of the original work? Are the characters whitewashed? Is it any good? Now, keep in mind, it's not like a check mark system. It has to check off yes on all 3, or in order to be considered a good movie. A movie can still stand on its own, even if it's not faithful to the story or themes, even if the characters are whitewashed. But these are things that you're going to want to think about before we go in, whether or not these are important to you. So, our very first film was 1991's The Guyver, which was adapted from the manga Bio-Boosted Armor Guyver, which is pretty crazy. I don't know too much about Guyver, but the movie is definitely unique. Now, The Guyver is about Sean Barker, who stumbles upon a conspiracy involved with the powerful Kronos Company, and had discovered a lost alien artifact called the Guyver, which is essentially a bioorganic Iron Man suit, for those of you not in the know. And it is like I said, a suit of armor that enacts his brand of justice against the Kronos Company and their evil zoonoid forces, who are kind of like these weird alien monsters that take the form of men whenever it's convenient for them. Now, is this movie faithful? As far as I could tell, yes. I don't know too much about Guyver, but it does hit the story beats. Is it whitewashed? Absolutely. The only character that remains Japanese from the original one is the main character's, the protagonist's girlfriend, who is the same. But the entire thing has been taken into America. All the other characters have been changed. There's even the actor who played Luke Skywalker is in this film. So hey, if you like him in a feature, check out Guyver. Is it good? Yes. Starting our list off with a good one. You will like this if you like superheroes and Super Sentai or Tokusatsu. There's a lot of great practical effects. I don't remember the guy who did the special effects name, but he's a really big name in Japanese production. So definitely check it out if you're interested in that. Now, following that up with everybody's favorite adaptation, the 1990 film Fist of the North Star, adapted from the manga of the same name. So, Fist of the North Star takes place in the scarred wastelands in the wake of World War III. The disgraced martial artist Kenshiro travels the land to escape his destiny as the heir to the Fist of the North Star, a legendary martial arts technique. When his dead master calls him back to action, Kenshiro must fight his former comrade Shin in order to save his kidnapped fiancée Julia, or Yulia. I don't really know what's the correct pronunciation because it's different between the adaptations. Is it faithful? Kind of. It's got the same basis, and it does use a lot of the same imagery. Like Kenshiro, he does the 100 crack fist. He does the "you're already dead" thing, but it doesn't really look as good as it is in animation or manga. It looks quite silly. Is it whitewashed? Absolutely. I think a lot of people would say that Fist of the North Star is kind of like nebulous in that a lot of the characters don't have a distinct ethnicity. But I would say at the very least, Kenshiro is intended, or at least gives the impression that he's supposed to be Japanese. But here he's played by a German bodybuilder guy named Gary Daniels, I think so. And is it good? No, it's kind of a boring movie. Um, like all the scenes that you'd want to see, just look him up on YouTube. You get to see him blow up some guy's head. He does some goofy martial arts. Again, doesn't look as good as it does in the anime or manga. So if you wanna watch it, just stick to YouTube. And so from here, we are gonna skip 11 years to the 2000 and or I'm sorry, not the 11 years. That's going to be like what 13 years over to Speed Racer, the 2008 film, which was adapted from the manga Mach Go Go Go, also known better as Speed Racer here in the States. Now, Speed Racer is about, Speed Racer. Um, in a racing accident that killed his brother, Speed Racer enters the cross-country racing rally on behalf of his family's company as the rival corporation Royalton Industries attempts to sabotage his Speed's shots at winning. Is it faithful? Yes, but there's a great big asterisk there that's going to tie into this next one. Is it whitewashed? Yes, kind of. This film is specifically based on the localization of Mach Go 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 that we in the States got in the 1960s. So characters are based around that. They're not really trying to go with the original, but to recreate how it felt to young people who are watching it for the first time here in the States. But it is good, especially if you like fun racing and car combat and pretty colors. Like, it is a gorgeous film that has not a lot of substance behind it, but it's a lot of fun. And this was a Wachowski sisters film. So they had grown up with it. And like we said earlier, they were influenced from anime. So they came in from that perspective to channel that hyper colorful feeling of anime. So definitely give that one a shot. Now, I think you guys all know how to feel about this next one that's coming up. The one, the only, Dragon Ball Evolution, adapted from the series or the manga series Dragon Ball. Now, just take a moment. look at the source material on the left and look at what we got here on the right. You know, you couldn't miss the mark anymore if you tried. Now, Dragon Ball Evolution is in the plot. An ancient alien warlord named Piccolo attacks his home and kills his grandfather. Son Goku discovers the power of the Dragon Balls, 7 relics that can grant wishes. Goku sets out to find the mythical Dragon Balls, gaining friends and foes along the way. Is it faithful? No. This is like Dragon Ball in the way of Transformers. And if you've seen the movie, you'll kind of get that. Like, there's a weird kind of teen romance, like an everyday school life spin on it. And characters are just not as goofy as they were in the original. Is it whitewashed? Absolutely. Son Goku may be Saiyan, but the implication is that he has roots from Asian mythology, and at least all the characters, most of the characters, other than I think Yamcha and Goku's grandfather, are whitewashed. Maybe Chi-Chi is, but again, it's been a while since I watched this movie, and it's kind of hard to sit through, like what some of you guys are saying in the chat. And of course, is it good? No. It doesn't. It has nothing that makes Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z fun. It really feels like somebody grabbed the rights for Dragon Ball and said, "Hey, let's just make a movie out of it. Just make what you can. We're gonna put a bunch of stars in it," and it didn't work. For those of you who are paying attention to the new series, particularly Dragon Ball Super, the actor who played Piccolo in this film actually kind of regrets his involvement in the film, but he is now officially part of the new cast of English dub. He plays the character Zamasu. I'm not really caught up on the new Dragon Ball series, but it really is cool to see them bringing back somebody who has a little bit of experience with this, even if it is the worst adaptation here we have here in the States. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and move to the next film, 2009's Astro Boy, adapted from the classic manga by Osamu Tezuka, Tetsuwan Atom. Now, Astro Boy takes place, or at least it's about a tragic accident with an experimental energy source. The scientist, Dr. Tenma, loses his son Toby. In his grief, Dr. Tenma creates a robot in Toby's image, imbuing him with the mysterious blue energy. Once Toby's secret is known, he must fight against the forces that seek to manipulate him as Astro Boy. Now, is this film faithful? Sort of. One thing that's cool about this movie is that it does acknowledge the way that Osamu Tezuka intended his characters to be enjoyed, and that his characters are never exclusive to the series they come from. His characters, in his mind, are actors that show up in different productions. As such, they have characters from other Tezuka productions that show up during this movie. But it's kind of weird, and this ties into is it whitewashed? The film very obviously wants to make you believe aesthetically it's Japan. It takes place mostly on a giant floating island that resembles Tokyo and has a big mountain Fuji. So they want you to, to shortcut to think, oh, it's Japan, but all the characters with a Japanese name, such as Dr. Tenma and Astro himself, they kind of change their names to make sure that you don't think they're too ethnic. Of course, Astro's original name, Tobio, is changed from Tobio to Toby. So again, it's kind of weird why they couldn't keep it original to the original version. But is this film good? Personally, I'm not a big fan of it. I think that it's a fairly unremarkable CGI adaptation. Like, if you put your little cousin or put your kid or your cousin in front of this and say, hey, let's watch Astro Boy, they'll probably say, no, go put on Frozen 2 or something, because at least, those will be competent CG films. It's kind of boring, but again, I'm an adult. What do I know? It is interesting, so maybe if you're a big fan of Tezuka Productions, this would be worth a watch. Now, coming up, Old Boy, adapted from the 1996 manga and the 2003 film of the same name. Has anybody in chat seen the Korean version of the film? And if so, have you read any of the manga? Because I've only read the first volume and I've seen the Korean movie. I love the Korean movie, but the first manga is not anything like it. And of course, following in suit, the Old Boy adaptation in 2013 really isn't like either of them. But we'll go ahead into greater detail. Now, in Old Boy, it's about Joe Doucette, who is an alcoholic deadbeat, and he was kidnapped and held captive in a hotel room for 20 years, framed for the murder of his wife. One day, Joe was released from the prison and issued a challenge by his captor, discover the captor's identity, and to prove his own innocence. Now, is it faithful? Not really. It draws mostly on the 2003 film, which is significantly more dramatic. It's very gritty. In fact, it's a movie that's difficult to get through without squirming. Like, there's a lot of gross stuff, but it is intense. With that said, I love the original adaptation. Is it whitewashed? Absolutely. They don't really keep any elements Japanese or Korean from the last one, but that's kind of to be expected with this film. Is it good? No, absolutely not. It doesn't have any of the bite that the old film does. It kind of pulls its punches when it really shouldn't. But me personally, it didn't do it for me. Now, up next, and I will be surprised if anybody in chat has seen this movie, but this is Kite, 2014's Kite, adapted from the OVA Kite from 1998. Now, I'll be surprised if anybody has seen the movie version. Kite the anime, it's been on Netflix for a while. Now, Kite is about, it takes place in like a societal collapse, not quite an apocalypse, but something close to it. The young girl named Sawa poses as a prostitute in order to lure in and assassinate criminals in search of, and she's doing this to search for her father's murderer, a man who is a gang leader called the Emir. Detective Carl Aker, played by Samuel L. Jackson, covers Sawa's rampage from the police and keeps her on the addictive drug AMP to focus her on the targets. But when Sawa starts to come down from the drug's effects, she begins to remember more than she was supposed to. Now, is it faithful? The primarily plot, for the most part, is faithful. It's been a long time since I've seen the original OVA, but of course, it does take place in a completely new setting, like this kind of societal collapse. Is it whitewashed? Yes, it is. I mean, it took place in Japan in the original one. Interestingly enough, this was not technically a Hollywood production. This was an adaptation that was filmed and done by a South African production company, which was interesting. And I think the entire cast, other than Samuel L. Jackson, it's primarily white people, but they're not like Americans. They speak with an interesting accent. I think they may be from South Africa or from around the region. But is it good? No, not really. It's kind of a slow film and it's bizarre and it makes you feel really uncomfortable in a way that the original was not supposed to. In the original OVA, you can kind of separate yourself. Like, yes, it's kind of weird sexual and there's a lot of violence, but they played that up due to the genre. And in this one, it just makes you feel bad, you know? Kind of, there's not really a good way to describe how this movie made me feel. I guess the best way to say, hey, who produced this movie? The Weinstein Company. There you go. I ain't got to say more. Anyways, the next film we have is Edge of Tomorrow, also known as Live, Die, Repeat, if you saw this movie in Europe. which of course came out in 2014. This was adapted from the light novel All You Need Is Kill. Pictured up here, I have the manga version, which has art by Takeshi Obata, who did the art in Death Note. And I would really suggest reading that, especially if you're interested in this story. Now, Edge of Tomorrow is about Major William Cage, who is conscripted to the front lines of humanity's last stand against a hostile alien invasion. And he discovers that after he dies, he has the ability to wake up the previous day after he's killed. He figures out that he has this power and he teams up with a combat veteran named Rita Vrataski. And the two of them use Cage's abilities to tip the war in their favor. Is it faithful to the original story? Yes. It's a very simple premise. It's humanity is defending themselves against an alien onslaught. One of them figures out he can wake up the previous day after being killed. Is it whitewashed? Absolutely. And it really only matters for the main character, Tom Cruise's character, who was explicitly Japanese in the original one. But for this one, they felt like they had to cast the whitest of all people, Tom Cruise. Take it as you will. I feel like it's mostly a missed opportunity, mostly just because Tom Cruise. I'm sick of them casting him thinking, hey, you're really gonna love this late 20s, early 30s guy. Come on, he's been doing those roles since the 80s. If we're not gonna cast a Japanese person, at least pick somebody else who's interesting for the role. But regardless, is it good? Absolutely. I think this is a good movie, and if you like science fiction and movies that feel like video games, particularly like an FPS or like something like Gears of War, Edge of Tomorrow is right up your alley. It's a very, very fun movie. Whoo boy, this next one, I think people are going to know this one as well. The Netflix Death Note movie from 2017, adapted from the manga of the same name. So, Death Note. High school misfit Light Turner stumbles upon a mysterious Death Note after being harassed by his fellow students. The Death Note summons the Death God, Ryuk, who instructs him to use the book to kill whomever he wishes. Light assumes the mantle of Kira to enact justice on the criminals, attracting the attention of genius detective L as the two play a deadly game of wits. Now, is the Death Note faithful? I don't think it's really faithful. The director was very outspoken in saying, hey, if you want to adapt Death Note, you got to change a lot of stuff. Light himself as the main character has changed a lot. The concept of the Death Note is very, very different. There's not really like the heart attack deaths, like whenever you write somebody's name in, they die in the goriest way possible. Is the film whitewashed? Yes. Whereas nearly the entire series took place in Japan in the original one, this new film almost takes place entirely in the States. Every character, including Light, his father, other characters are whitewashed. They do have a black actor who plays L, which he does a great job. So if they're gonna localize it and try to make all the characters American, that's an interesting way to do it. I liked his performance up until the end where he grabbed a Tron gun and was like running after Light through the cities. I thought that was a very not Death Note thing to do. But regardless, is the film good? No, it's not. Anybody who has seen this movie knows the last time that I watched this, it was purely just to put something on while I was constructing a shelf. And you know what? If you're constructing furniture, that's not a bad pick. Regardless, it's not that great. Although I will give it two things. Like somebody mentioned before, Ryuk in this movie is awesome. Willem Dafoe is a great casting pick, and he really just hams it up. And the look of Ryuk is very unique, but it still looks like the character you know. He's a little bit more malicious in this film than he is in the manga, which is kind of weird because in the manga he's almost like a little bit like comedic relief. But the other thing that is good, the last 10 to 15 minutes of this movie. I was just complaining about how Light takes a Tron gun and tries to gun down L takes a Tron gun and tries to kill Light through the city. But at the very end is where it feels like a Death Note movie or Death Note story where Light is using the Death Note to manipulate others to his gain. So, if you really like Death Note, maybe it's worth a watch just to see how bad it can be. You know, if nothing else, if you have Netflix, it doesn't cost you anything other than what you're already paying. So, hey, there you go. All right. Now, before we get to this next one, I'm going to have to calm down a little bit. You might have to reel me in there in the chat because this movie gets me riled up. That would be the 2017 Ghost in the Shell film, which was adapted from the 1989 manga series and the 1990 film Ghost in the Shell, as well as taking certain plot points from other Ghost in the Shell stories throughout the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. So, Ghost in the Shell is about Major Mira Killian, who is a cyborg with a robotic body, which is known as a shell. And she works for Section 9, a government counterterrorism agency. Uh, she is uh, she is tracking down a murderous hacker named Kuza, and the Major discovers that the company that had created her body is involved in a massive cover-up involving Kuza, and that she is also in the center of this conspiracy. So, is it faithful? Sort of. This Ghost in the Shell movie is almost like a Frankenstein's monster of Ghost in the Shell. It has the rough setting of the first movie. It kind of plays into some of the themes of Standalone Complex, but then again, everything else is kind of new and it's dumbed down. Ghost in the Shell originally is kind of smart science fiction, smart cyberpunk. But this film really wants to get the iconography of Ghost in the Shell. Like you see a shot and say, hey, that was in the 90s movie. But when it comes to its plot, it doesn't leave any ambiguities. It does a great job of saying and not showing. Um, is this film whitewashed? Absolutely. Canonically, in fact. Whitewashing is kind of part of the plot, in that when this film was announced, and they announced that Scarlett Johansson was going to play the Major Makoto Kusanagi, people were thinking, hey, wait a minute, isn't that a Japanese character? And they said, oh, ye of little faith, we'll show you when our film intentionally made her a white person, only to reveal in the end that she was supposed to be a Japanese person the whole time and she was just put into another body, which is just about the worst way you could deal with that because you acknowledge that, hey, it's bad. They actually changed your ethnicity. Maybe that's not a good thing, but if you're doing that in your film otherwise on the production level, I don't know. It kind of sends a mixed signal. Is this film good? Definitely not. Again, there are some different opinions. I definitely think it's an entertaining film, but it is definitely not good in my mind. The reason why, it doesn't carry anything that's really important about Ghost in the Shell. It really thinks it's important to recreate the iconic sequences, like the fight scenes and the scene where the Major is on the building and she falls off and she turns invisible. It thinks it's really important to do that, but none of the great storytelling is there. It really does feel like baby's first cyberpunk movie, where you go through the streets and like from floor to ceiling to high rise, there's these huge holographic geishas and the koi fish that really say, hey, doesn't this remind you a lot of another cyberpunk movie? Blade Runner? But it doesn't do anything interesting. It doesn't comment anything on, what this universe is and why we should really care. So I don't think it's good. We can definitely come back to it because I think we're going to have plenty of time for discussion. But avoid Ghost in the Shell if you can. Now, this is going to bring us over to 2019's Alita Battle Angel, which was adapted from the manga, which is in Japan, it's called Ganmu, even though it looks like it's pronounced Gunm. And but here in the States, we just call it Battle Angel Alita. Now, stranded in a junkyard in a dystopian future, inventor Dyson Ito discovers the deactivated head of a cyborg girl. Ito then provides a body for the girl and names her Alita as they discover the dangers of living in the shadow of the tyrannical city, Zalem. Now, is this faithful? Yes, actually. As soon as I saw this movie last year, I had to binge all I could of the very first series of Battle Angel Alita, and I'm glad to say, like, a lot of it is there. Of all the movies that I've showed here, Alita Battle Angel may be the most faithful from its source material. Um, is this film whitewashed? Just barely, but yes. And what I mean from that is the original series doesn't take place in Japan like most of these other ones. The original series actually takes place up in Kansas City, even though it's kind of an apocalyptic wasteland where borders don't really mean anything and the only place they live is beneath the city Zalem. But the only character that they explicitly whitewashed was the character of Daisuke Ito, whom they changed to Dyson Ito as Christoph Waltz plays him in this movie. He's really great in the role, but at the same time, it's a little bit of a bummer that they couldn't get a Japanese person to play Daisuke Ito. And we can go into why that's important in the discussion, but it's a little bit of a bummer. But hey, what's important at the end? Is this a good movie? Yes, and I can tell that Nick really likes this one, and you know what? I don't blame him. It's of all of the adaptations, this movie feels the most like an anime. It moves very fast. There's explosive action. It feels like it uses the film to recreate a feeling of anime the greatest. Like, it's tough to explain, but this is a series where people are using their fists and swords and they're duking it out and they're jumping all over the place. Um, and it justifies that. So, on that level, yes, I definitely think that it is a really good adaptation. Again, is it the best movie that year? Probably not. But, amongst a list of stinkers like we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes, it definitely is a breath of fresh air. Now, moving on. Detective Pikachu from 2019, adapted from the 1996 game and the 1997 anime series Pokemon. Now, I bet you're saying, hey, Andy, Pokemon's not technically an anime, it was a video game series. And I say, yes, you're absolutely right. But Pokemon is more than just a game, especially now that we're like, 20 years down the line? And, for these purposes, we're going to include it here because it is really important, especially amongst this list. Now, Detective Pikachu takes place in a world where humans and Pokemon live in coexistence. Tim Goodman, who is played by he's a character on the far right. I forget his name. He distances himself from the once cherished creatures. He used to be a Pokemon trainer, but he kind of fell out. He is brought to Rhyme City following the purported death of his father, only to team up with a talking Pikachu determined to discover the conspiracy behind it all. Is it faithful? Yeah, it is. It's faithful to the feeling of Pokemon. It doesn't adapt any one story, but that's because Pokemon isn't just one story. It's about the world and how they interact with the Pokemon, and in that case, maybe the best way to adapt it is not to directly adapt the story or the anime. An interesting way of going about it. We might see more adaptations like that in the future. Who knows? Anyways, is the film whitewashed? No, because just like the last thing when I said it was faithful, it's not about any one character from the games or the anime. The only character who I think shows up between the two is the character of Red from the original game, who is depicted as a Japanese person in the beginning. It's practically a cameo, but hey, that matters. And what's interesting is that this film was a joint operation between Legendary Studios here in the States and Warner Brothers and Toho Studios in Japan. Now, if you guys have were tuning into my last Godzilla panel, you'll recognize Toho as the production company behind the Godzilla movies. But I think that Toho's involvement was able to kind of make this film feel like it works for a Western audience, but also turn it around and it feels like it works in Japan. It really is a diverse film. And honestly, that's the best way to do Pokemon. You know, is it good? Originally, these were going to show up one by one, but Meowth, that's right. Um, it, it, this film is a little bit mixed between fans of Pokemon, but for me, as the last game that I played was Pokemon Ruby version, it was able to immediately connect me with what was important for Pokemon at the time. You know, and they do a good job. Look at it. Pikachu looks like Pikachu. You know, he speaks like Ryan Reynolds, but he's cute. There's Psyduck. You can see a Bulbasaur in this movie. You know, there's a Snorlax. Like half the fun is just looking in the background and seeing how methodically they've recreated all of these different Pokemon from the first gen up until the newest one at that point, and they really breathed life into them. So if you haven't seen Detective Pikachu and you love Pokemon, the off chances that you haven't seen this movie, go see it. It's definitely entertaining. All right. So unfortunately, that leaves us up to the present. There are no more anime adaptations that have occurred. However, there are other ones that are gonna be adapted in the future if all things go according to plan. So these anime adaptations of the future, the first one, at least the one that they're really trying to put out, Legendary Pictures is trying to do Mobile Suit Gundam. Of course, an iconic and seminal anime. Um, this definitely feels like one that would be ripe for an adaptation, and we can talk a little bit more about that in the discussion. But this picture that I have here up the top is the Gundam that appeared in the movie Ready Player One. Really, only kind of as a cameo. It's not about Gundam, but my theory is that Ready Player One was there to test the waters of these different properties. You know, put a Gundam here because we may be wanting to do a Gundam movie. Hey, let's put King Kong in there because we're trying to do another Kong film. You know, they're testing the waters with these little properties, and if all things considered, we may be seeing Gundam within the next couple of years. The same production company is trying to do an adaptation of My Hero Academia. Whether or not that's going to be as successful has been yet to see. As you guys know, My Hero Academia is so popular right now that I can understand why they'd want to do it. But we're so saturated with superhero movies. Will audiences will be drawn to, you know, a superhero story that is based on superhero stories? I don't know. We'll just have to see. Um, the Akira from the very beginning has there have been so many different adaptations, and supposedly the last attempt was being helmed by Taika Waititi. Now, keep in mind that was announced well before he was doing his next Thor film, so we don't know if that's been put on hold. And I'm very skeptical of an adaptation of Akira because it's such a big film, especially in terms of the manga, and it's a very important film to Japan. You don't want to see it whitewashed. Now, Taika Waititi is a great director and he's really good at casting. And he has previously said in some interviews that he wants to keep Akira with relatively no-name actors who, you know, fit the characters, who are, you know, from their ethnic background. So, hey, if he can hold up his end of the bargain, I'm down for that. What I'm not down for is J.J. Abrams' adaptation of Your Name, of the Japanese anime Kimi no Namaiwa. I don't remember. I went to go see it a couple years ago, and I cried my eyes out, but I did not learn how to say the title in Japanese. But for those of you that don't know Your Name involves the connection between a boy and a girl, the boy who lives in Tokyo in the city, and the girl who lives out in the countryside, and they swap over into each other's bodies. and they have to live while trying to communicate with each other. Now, they've been explicit in that they're trying to do this thing where the kid is he's a city slicker. He lives in like New York City, and the girl, she lives on like a Native American reservation. I don't really like that comparison between like the city and the country of Japan, because it's not exactly the same thing. But again, far be it from me to judge a film before we've seen anything from it. But let's just say I'm not excited. And thanks for correcting me. It's Kimi no na wa. Thank you. Of course, Andy Muschietti, who is the director of the two It films, wants to do an adaptation of Attack on Titan. I'm not a big Attack on Titan fan, but just visually, I think that would make it it would be very interesting. There were two live-action Attack on Titan films that were released a couple years ago. It didn't seem like those were held very fondly, but there were a lot of what's the best way to say? There were a lot of changes that they made. They kind of, and besides, Attack on Titan hadn't finished at that point. They had to take a lot of liberties. Whether or not this new version will be more close to the manga or the anime that people like, or if it's going to take more liberties, we don't know. We'll have to see. Um, and Netflix is pushing along a second Death Note film. Again, because regardless of how bad you can say that the first Death Note movie was, they didn't lose any money on it because it's a subscription service. This is really where we're going to see most of the adaptations of the future, probably along streaming where the risk is lower, maybe where they can take more risks in the future, or at least with the story of the casting. But for now, I think that's where we're going to see this. Of course, probably the adaptation that we're closest to seeing out of all of these is Netflix Cowboy Bebop. We know the casting, but that's not, or we don't know much else. I do not remember the actor's name, but he played Sulu in the Star Trek film. He is going to play Spike Spiegel, which, hey, I'm excited about it. Cowboy Bebop has an incredibly diverse cast of characters, and if these are the characters they're going for the main cast, you know, maybe it'll turn out all right. Again, we'll have to see. I know that the series was delayed after the main actor got into like a serious accident on set, but we're probably going to be seeing something like that within the next year or two. With that said, they're also going to try to adapt One Piece, which, yeah, good luck. Um, just like Dragon Ball, One Piece is such an incredibly stylized animated world that when you cast it in the real world, it would probably look really weird. You don't think twice of Luffy stretching his arms all over the place and knocking the living heck out of somebody on a ship. That's like a mile away. But seeing that in live action, that's definitely an uncanny valley thing. But that's all the ones that they're planning on for now. If they've done some since then, I wouldn't know about it. So now, let's go ahead and lead it up to discussion. We've got about a cool 10 minutes left. So I want to, go with look to you guys in the chat. Hey, bring up some interesting questions or perspectives on this. While the chat is catching up, we'll go over some of these. These are film and Western pop culture references in Dirty Pair, upper left hand, which is a reference to Aliens. Kill la Kill, another reference to the xenomorph of Aliens, and City Hunter, which has a lot of different references to Jaws, to the Terminator, to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and even Colonel Sanders, who is, of course, very big in Japan. Yeah, KFC is huge in Japan. So let's go ahead and see what do you guys think. I definitely like all the different opinions that we had. Let me go ahead and Gundam. Young Mikazuki says that Gundam would have been written by Brian K. Vaughan. That would have been interesting. I don't know if I can confirm it, but like if you can get a good name that's committed to adapting Gundam, the story of Gundam, then all the better, because I definitely think the story of the Universal Century is super strong and is practically like it appeals to people the same way Star Wars does. So, hey, we'll just have to see. Joe BBQ says somebody should do Yu Yu Hakusho. Sure, like I think all these adaptations come with a great big asterisk. A good adaptation of Yu Yu Hakusho. Yu Yu Hakusho really is out there. And if they do an adaptation, I hope it's still Japanese. Like it's so based around Japanese mythology and supernatural concepts that to see it with a whole bunch of like, like a weird Caucasian Kuwabara, like I couldn't handle that. Um, I let's say, do you think a Western set anime like a Hellsing or early JoJo could be as good as an anime adaptation? Um, Absolutely. I don't know about Hellsing very much. Um, the first couple of JoJo's arcs take place between England, the United States, and Mexico. So I definitely think you could. Now, a lot of what we love about JoJo is not really part of it's how unreal it is. It's how fantastic these characters are and how they contort their bodies into stylish, new poses, which would be difficult for actors. But I honestly, I'd love to see them try that. I'd love to see them try Phantom Blood and Battle Tendency, and if those are good, maybe see if they got the cojones to try to set it in Japan, or at least have Jotaro and Kakyoin be Japanese characters. Because Part Three really is an international story. It's essentially uh, like it's kind of like Indiana Jones in a weird way. Let's see. I'm still waiting for somebody to announce a Sword Art Online adaptation since Ready Player One was a thing. Yeah, Ready Player One was a thing. I don't like. I'm not surprised if they do Sword Art Online. Personally, I wouldn't like to see it. I'm not a big fan of Sword Art Online, but I would not be surprised if they went that direction. Angel Dust says Yu-Gi-Oh. I don't think that they could do a live action movie about Yu-Gi-Oh. Not due to any lack of popularity on Yu-Gi-Oh's part, but card games is something that they do really well at making exciting in the anime. But I don't know if that would translate well to live action, especially trying to visualize an actor with Yugi's hairstyle is kind of making me a little uncomfortable. Just kidding. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll have to see. Um, Piano Poodle points out Fate Stay Night adaptation. And you know what? I absolutely would like to see an adaptation of Fate Stay Night, like a Hollywood adaptation, because it's very serious when you get down to a lot of the core themes. I would like to see like a little bit more of like, again, there's so much with realism in the concept of ethnicity, but like a character like Gilgamesh, who kind of comes from the very first civilization in the Middle East, maybe have a more realistic interpretation to how we understand the Babylonians. But again, who knows? At the very least, Fate Stay Night would be really cool to see in live action, I think. Oh, we hit 12 hours of streaming. Woo! We have entertained ourselves for half a day. Big O in live action, absolutely, 100%. I think Big O would be super cool. It's got a great scenario, giant robots. It kind of dips into that same appeal of Pacific Rim, but yes, Big O definitely. We have about 5 minutes left, so let's go ahead and finish this up quickly. Cyborg 009, could they do it? You know what? I think they could, because think about it this way. Cyborg 009 is essentially Cyborg X-Men. That's all it is. I actually read a super cool comic that was a Western comic reboot of Cyborg 009, and they played up on those themes. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. I don't know too much about Cyborg 009 outside of that comic and when they crossed over with Devilman, but yes, I definitely think that would be super cool. Sailor Moon, I guess they could. Um, Whether or not they would adapt it here in the States, I don't know. They definitely could. And there was a live-action Sailor Moon in Japan, but Sailor Moon is really near and dear to us otaku, but I don't know if Sailor Moon has a lot of knowledge in the public sphere after its airing. But again, what do I know? I don't know too much about Sailor Moon. Um, let's see. What else do we got? Personally, I think the easiest anime they could adapt is Black Lagoon. Black Lagoon already is kind of separated from Japan and has a large multi-ethnic cast. It's essentially like an anime Quentin Tarantino film. I definitely feel like that would immediately find an audience in the States and that they could absolutely do that. And Piano Poodle, don't even bring that up. Shame on you. If I could, there you go. Um, let's see, Sailor Moon. Well, yeah, I guess Sailor Moon is kind of like a superhero film, and that is really super popular right now. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try it from that angle. Um, but yes, other series that would be really popular, or at least really good for that. Scrolling through. Robotech movie. Somebody mentioned Robotech, and I would not want to see a Robotech adaptation, primarily because Robotech is like the amalgam of several different series, from Macross to, and I'm sure somebody else will correct me in chat, but it's so many different series that's kind of amalgamized. And from what I remember, the company that owns Robotech is very stringent and in protecting their copyright, which is why we can't get proper releases of Macross and other series. So if nothing else, not Robotech just because I think their company sucks, but a Macross film. I definitely think that could be done because Macross is still pretty popular in Japan. What about a drama like Your Lie in April? You absolutely could, but I think uh, when you're trying to adapt something, like Your Lie is so important because it's animated, that taking it into the live action realm, you miss some of that. So I don't know so much. Last I heard, a live action Robotech was in production. Yes, absolutely. All right. Yeah. Chobits? Maybe as a short series, and I'll leave off on this. The future of anime adaptations, I think, are in series like on Netflix and on television, because that's the way that they can actually push a little bit more of an interesting cast and take more risks. So if you want to see anime moving forward, definitely look to that. And with that said, thank you guys so much for coming to my panel. If you like this panel and you want to hear me talk about more anime stuff or movies or just general film knowledge, go ahead and follow me. My Twitter is its_ALHuggins, and my Tumblr is alhuggins.tumblr.com. Once again, thanks for showing up. It means a lot. Thanks to our moderators and everybody who's helping with us with the streams. They're bringing forth a really great night, even if we can't go there to our convention. So, hey, I'm going to cut it off here. Thank you so much for showing up. I hope you guys have a great night, and, keep sticking around with the streams. We got good stuff coming up.